The sixth clause of the Peace of the Drowned reads, "A daughter of the Alpha's house of Cardron shall be given to the Alpha king of Velomor, and held by him a year and a day. And at the end of that time either house may declare the peace kept and the marriage void, or the peace kept and the marriage confirmed." I had that clause by heart before I had her name. I wrote it myself, at a trestle table on the causeway, with my knuckles split from cold and a Cardron man bleeding quietly against the parapet 10 feet away because neither side would carry him off until the ink was dry. I chose every word in it. I chose given. I have thought about that word for a long time since. Understand what my country is, and you will understand what I did wrong. Velomor is black water and black ground. Peat to the depth of 3 men, and under the peat sometimes older ground that nobody has seen. We burn the earth we stand on. In summer the moor is copper and gold and full of birds, and in winter it drowns, and between drowning and freezing there are the 3 weeks we call the rime, when a fog comes up off the drown that does not lift, does not move, and does not let anything cross. No riders, no boats, no word. And because word cannot always cross, Velomor learned to be very careful with words when it can. In Wenlow Hall, everything said aloud before the writ keeper is written down, and everything written down is true and stays true. That is the whole of our law. We have no other. A man who says, "I will give you my second calf" in Wenlow Hall has given a calf, and there is no arguing after. A king who says, "I will hold the long stone" holds it until he dies on it. We do not say things twice, and we do not say things we do not mean, and there are words which are simply not spoken in the hall at all, because there is no clause to hold them and no way to enforce them, and the ink cannot make them true. Want is one of those words. I was raised in that hall. I have never in my life said in it that I wanted anything. So when the war ended, after enough winters that the men who began it were dead and the men who finished it were not sure why, I wrote the piece the way Velomor writes everything, clause by clause, what was owed in what quantity by which date into whose hand. Cattle. Pete writes on the eastern flats, the bones of the men we had left in Cardron's ground to be returned in the spring in linen named. And a bride, because Cardron would not sign without one, and because a hostage with a ring is called a wife, and a wife cannot be killed without cost. I did not think of her as a woman. I want to be exact about this, because it is the hinge on which everything turned. I thought of her as clause 6. She came in the 2nd week of the thaw, on the long stone, the causeway that runs 1.25 miles across the drown, laid down by people who did not leave us their name. Cardron brought her in a cart because a horse could not have carried the 2 chests they sent with her. I stood at the gate of Wenlow with my writ keeper on my left and my war captain on my right, and the whole of my hold behind me, because that is what we do when a debt is paid. Bresk, my captain, said at first under his breath, "That's not her." The writ named Nola Bray, 19 years old, niece of the Alpha of Cardron. The woman who climbed down off the cart was not 19. She had a broad, calm, unbeautiful face and hands that had been in water a great deal, and she came the last 30 feet on foot with a bundle under her arm because she did not want the ox brought further, and said so, quietly, to the ox's driver, and the driver did as she asked. Cardron's Alpha, Tam Hollies, sat his horse behind her with his mouth arranged into something that was almost an apology and was not one. "Alpha King," he said, "the house of Cardron keeps the peace." "The writ name's Nola Bray," said Leda Min. My writ keeper was 70 that spring. She had a voice like a nail being drawn out of a plank, and she had written down every word I had said in that hall since I was 11 years old, and there was nothing she loved in the world except accuracy. "The writ name's a daughter of my house," said Hollies. "This is my brother's elder daughter, Ilsa Bray." I heard the hall behind me take a breath. That is the noise of a hold being insulted. Because Velomor knew what Cardron had sent. Word crosses the drown badly, but it crosses. Ilsa Bray was the woman who washed Cardron's dead. Not a healer, not a nurse. The one who came after. She kept the roll of them. She laid them out and closed them and sewed the linen and carried the ends of the boards, and when there was nobody left to help her carry, she carried alone, and Cardron let her, the way a hold lets a woman do a thing it needs done and cannot bear to look at. Nobody in Cardron mocked her. Nobody in Cardron sat beside her either. In 11 years of war she had handled more of Cardron's sons than their mothers had, and it had made her, this is what they said of her, and they meant it kindly, some of them unlucky to touch. And she smelled of lye and of peat smoke, and under both faint, the sweetish thing that no soap has ever taken out of anybody. Hollis had sent me a bride nobody would want, and he had sent her in her working clothes. I understood what he was doing before he had finished dismounting. He had lost the war, and he could not have it back, and so he had come to buy a grievance. If I turned her away at the gate, the peace of the drown broke on Velomore's side, before my own hold in the first month, and every clause in it, the cattle, the peat, the bones of my dead men still lying in his ground went into the fire with it, and it would be my hand that lit it. He would ride home and tell Cardron that the Alpha King of Velomore had refused a woman for the crime of touching the dead, and Cardron would arm again within the year gladly, and the whole thing would start over with better weather. He was watching my mouth. He wanted a sentence. I looked at her instead. She was standing where she had stopped in the middle of my gate yard holding the bundle. She was not looking at Hollis or at me. She was looking, with a kind of flat attention I could not read, at the ground of my hold, at the black turf and the drain cuts and the low bank of the causeway behind her, as though measuring something. Her chin was up. Her hands were quite steady. And she was, I realized, absolutely prepared to be refused, had come the mile and a quarter across the drown knowing it, had put her working clothes on that morning herself, since she had no other, and walked in them into a hall of 1,000 enemies to be told she was not fit. She was afraid. It was in her breathing and nowhere else. "Writ Keeper," I said. "Alpha King. Read Clause 6 aloud." Lita read it. Her nail voice went out over the yard, and everybody heard the word daughter and the word house, and did not hear the word Nola because I had not written it there. I had written a daughter of the Alpha's house of Cardron. The name had gone into the schedule of persons, appended at the bottom where names go. Hollis had scraped a name out of a schedule. He had not touched the clause. I have never in my life been so grateful for my own pedantry. "The peace is kept," I said. "Enter it." Lita's pen moved. Hollis's face did something small and ugly and closed. I turned to Ilse Bray, and I said the sentence I had prepared for a 19-year-old girl, and it was the wrong sentence, and I said it anyway because I had nothing else ready. "You are under my protection. No man in Velomore will lift a hand or a word against you. If any does, bring me his name." She looked up at me then properly for the first time. Her eyes were gray, the way water is gray when the sky is. "And who will bring me yours, Alpha King?" she said, "if you do." The yard went very quiet. Bresk's hand moved half an inch toward his belt, which is what Bresk's hand always did, and I put 2 fingers on his wrist without looking. "Lita," I said, "write it. If I lift a hand or a word against her, she is to bring my name to you, and you are to read it out in this hall before the whole hold. Write that she may do it. Write that no one may prevent her." Lita Min stopped. My writ keeper had not stopped in 40 years. "Alpha King," she said, "there is no clause." "Then this is one. Write it." She wrote it. That is how my wife came into my house. In a dead woman's apron, having extracted from me, in the first minute, a law against myself. I gave her the east chamber, which has its own door and its own hearth and a stair down to the herb yard, and I gave her the key to that door, and I told her in front of Lita and Bresk and my chamberlain that she would be married to me by the writ and by nothing else. No hand on her. No claim. A year and a day, and then the choice, and the choice hers. She said, "Thank you, Alpha King," in exactly the tone she would have used to a man who had passed her the salt. I did not see her for 6 days. On the 7th, Bresk came to me in the muniment room, where I do my accounts, and stood there rubbing the back of his neck. "She's in the drain cuts," he said. "Doing what?" "Digging." I went out. It was a soft, wet, gray afternoon, the moor breathing steam. Beyond the herb yard the ground drops into the old drain cuts, 6 feet down, and the peat there is bad and slumps in the thaw, and every spring we lose a yard of the bank, and every spring I mean to have it faced, and every spring there is something else. Ilse Bray was standing in the bottom of the cut in mud to her knees, with her sleeves rolled to the shoulder, holding something. "Two men," she said when she saw me. She did not say Alpha King, she was too busy. "One's Velomore, one's ours." I got down into the cut. I am not a small man, and it was not dignified. They had been in the peat perhaps 9 years. Peat does not let a man rot. It tans him and keeps him and turns him the color of a saddle. These two had gone into the water in a skirmish that I remembered, on a night I remembered, when the fog came up early and men on both sides walked off the long stone in the dark, and we did not go in after them because you do not go into the drown at night, not for anybody. I had given the order not to go in. I had been 22. The Velomore man still had his belt on. I knew the buckle. "You can tell," she said quite gently, "by the boots. Ours nail them across, yours nail them round." She was easing the peat away from a shoulder with the flat of her hand, not a spade. "Your man is Kello, I think. There's a K cut in the belt tongue." "Ossian Kello," I said. My voice came out strange. "He had a brother." "Is the brother living?" "Yes." "Then he'll want to carry him," she said. "Don't let anyone else carry him. He'll want to have done it." She said it as a fact about the world, the way you would say that rain comes from the west. And she went on working her hand into the peat, and after a while she said, without any change in her voice, "Alpha King, I am going to need lye and linen and a place with a door on it, and I am going to need 2 of your men who will not be sick, and I would like the 2 who are already sick of themselves, if you have any. They do better." I said, "You are the king's wife. You do not have to do this." She looked up at me from the bottom of that cut, with her arms black to the elbow. "No," she agreed. "I have to do this because there is nobody else in the world who knows how." I went up out of the cut and I stood on the bank in the wet air, and I found that I did not have the end of my sentence. I had opened my mouth to say, "Then you shall have what you need, and it shall be entered," which is a Velomore sentence, a good sentence, a sentence with a hem on it. And it went from me. What came out was, "Ilse, come up before dark." Just that, bare. No clause, no entering. My own name for her in my own mouth, and an instruction with no force behind it and no penalty attached, which in Velomore is not a law but only a wish, and we do not wish aloud. She came up before dark. The drown gave up 7 more that spring. Then 11 in the summer as the level dropped. The moor had been holding our war in its mouth for 11 years, and now, with the sluice cuts opened and the peat slumping, it began, without any hurry, to spit. She washed them all. She built her place in the old byre with the good door, and she scrubbed it out, and she made Bresk find her a long table and set it level. She had 2 men in the end, Fen Hollow, who had been my father's man and had shaking hands, and a boy called Ott who never spoke. They were both sick of themselves. She had been right about that too. She asked me for the roll of Velomore's dead. I had it. Every hold has it. Every hold pretends it is only a list of names, and it is not. It is a list of the times you failed to bring somebody home. She took the roll to her byre and she began to match it to what the drown gave her, and where she could not match it, she wrote a description in a fair, plain, unhurried hand. A man of middle height, a healed break in the left forearm, a good tooth wired in with silver. And someone would come, eventually, standing in the byre door with their cap in their hands, and say my father had a silver tooth, and she would step outside and let them be alone with him. She did the same for Cardron's dead. She wrote to Cardron. Holly's did not answer for 4 months and then answered badly, and she wrote again, and in the end Cardron sent a cart and a priest and 11 names. She did not tell me she was doing this. I learned it from Lida Min, who learned it because Ilsa had come to her formally to ask whether a Cardron name might be written in a Velomore writ, and Lida had said there was no clause, and Ilsa had said, then it may be written in the margin where there is no law at all. And Lida Min, who loves accuracy, and who had never once in 40 years been offered a new idea, had gone away and thought about it for 2 days. They wrote the names in the margin, both holds dead in one book in one hand. I sat in my own muniment room with the book open in front of me, and I looked at that margin for a long time. Here is what I understood, and understood too slowly. My country's law is very good. It has kept us from murdering each other for 400 years. It holds every word we say, and it never lets a word go. And because of it, Velomore is a place where a poor man's promise is worth exactly as much as a king's, and I would die for that, and I have nearly. And it has no clause for grief. None. It cannot be written. It has no quantity, no date, no hand to be delivered into. In 11 years of war, I had said, in that hall, the peace is kept, and the dead is entered, and the long stone holds, and I had never once said the thing that was true, because the thing that was true was that I was so tired I could not feel my hands, and I wanted the boys back, and there is no clause for that. And so in Velomore there is no way to say it, and this is the part I had never let myself see, in Velomore we do not say it. A woman had come across the causeway smelling of lye, and in 7 months she had done, in the margin of a book, the thing my whole law could not do. I did not send for her, I went to the buyer. She was alone. She was working with her back to the door, and she had a Cardron boy on the table, and she was combing the peat out of his hair with her fingers, one small section at a time, because a comb tears it. I stood in the door. She said without turning, "You are standing in my light, Alpha King." I moved. "His name is Ren Ardley," she said. "He was 15. He is on nobody's roll because he was not a soldier. He was a boy who went out to look at soldiers." She kept combing. "I am not going to write a boy who went out to look. I am going to write his name and the day and nothing else, because that is all anybody is owed." "Ilsa, why did they send you?" Her hand stopped, only for a moment, then they went on. "Because I am the least of the house of Cardron," she said, "and it was an insult, and you were meant to send me home, and then there would be a war again, and Alpha Hollies would have it. You knew that on the first day. You are not a stupid man." She lifted the boy's head and set it down again, more carefully than I have seen anything set down. "You did not send me home, so there is no war, so the sending failed. There is nothing else to know about it." "That is not an answer to the question I asked." "It is an answer to a question," she said. "Take it." And I stood there in my own byre, in my own hold, in my own kingdom, and I could not make my mouth do the next part. Because the next part was, "Why did you come?" And behind that was, "You knew you were being sent to be refused, and you came anyway in that apron up my causeway in front of 1,000 people. Why?" And behind that, further down in the dark under the peat where my law has never once gone, was a sentence with no clause to hold it, no quantity, no date, no hand to be delivered into. I did not say any of it. I went back to my accounts. I sat there until the candle went out. I had begun to lose the ends of my sentences some months before. Now I began to lose the beginnings. I should say, since the songs will say otherwise, that nothing came to me from my wolf. Men outside Velomore tell stories about us. They say an Alpha King knows his mate at the gate at once, and the beast in him rises up and speaks. My beast said nothing. He had known every enemy in the drown by scent for 11 years. He knew the man who would break before that man knew it himself. And about Ilsa Bray he was silent from the first day to the last, entirely. As if she were a stone or a season, and it insulted me. I am not a modest man. I wanted an omen. I would have taken any small thing, a mark, a heat, a certainty, some old magic to sign the paper for me. Nothing came. What came over 11 months was this: I could no longer speak properly in front of her. That is the whole of the sign I was given. In the hall, before my hold, in a language I had used my whole life, my sentences came out with the last third missing. I would begin, "It is entered that the eastern peach shall be cut in the 3rd week and delivered," and see her come in at the low door with her hair wet, and finish nothing. Lida Min began leaving gaps in the writ, which she had never done, and filling them in later, and never once mentioned it. And once, I looked over her shoulder and saw that she had written in the margin in her cramped clerk's hand, "The Alpha King did not finish," and had drawn a small line under it. Bresk noticed. Bresk is not subtle. He came into the muniment room and stood there for a while and then said, "Ask her." "There is a writ," I said. "There's a writ says she's yours for a year and a day. There's no writ says you can't speak to her like a man." "There is a writ," I said, "that gives her to me. Given, I wrote that word. If I go to her and ask and she says yes, Bresk, how would either of us ever know what that yes was?" He thought about it. He is slow and honest, and he thought about it properly. "That's a bad word," he agreed at last. "Given." "Yes. So change it." "It's a treaty," I said. "Both hold a copy. It is the only thing standing between us and 11 more years. It cannot be changed." Bresk looked at me for a while with the particular expression of a man who has followed you into water and does not intend to stop. "Then let her go," he said, "at the year and a day. Say the peace is kept and the marriage void. And then, when she's a free woman standing on nobody's ground, go across that causeway and ask her." He shrugged. "She can say no. That's the point of it, isn't it?" I sat with that for 3 months, and I could find nothing wrong with it. And it was the worst counsel I have ever taken, and he gave it to me out of love. The rhyme came in the last week, before the year was up. It came the way it always comes. No wind, no warning, the drown steaming at dusk, and by midnight the fog standing on the water like a wall you could set your hand against. 3 weeks of it, sometimes 4. Nothing crosses. Nothing. Cardron was a mile and a quarter away and might as well have been in the moon. Which meant that the year and a day would fall in the middle of it, and there would be nobody from Cardron to witness the declaration. And by Clause 11, I had written Clause 11 too, a declaration made without both houses present holds until it is disputed. I could have used that. A dishonest man would have. I told Lida to prepare the writ. She came to me the night before with the 2 parchments and her lamp, and she was not calm, which frightened me more than anything in the war. "Alpha King," she said, "sit down." I sat down. She laid our copy of the Peace of the Drown on the table and turned it to the schedule of persons at the foot, and she put the lamp behind it, so the light came up through the skin, and she put her finger on a place. "There," she said. The name written there was Ilse Bray, and behind it, through the light, faint as a bruise under skin, was the ghost of another name scraped out, longer, different. And around it the parchment was thinner and hairy, where somebody had taken a knife to it and then rubbed the nap back down with a stone badly, the way you would if you were doing it at night in a hurry with your heart going. "Nola Bray," said Lida. "We knew that. Holly scraped it." "No," she sat down, which she had never done in that room. "Alpha King, I have written for you since you were a child, and I am telling you a thing about ink. Look at the letters." I looked. Ilse Bray, and beneath in the same ink, the same fair, plain, unhurried hand, a second line I had never in 11 months bothered to read, because it was in the schedule of persons at the foot where names go. Item, the said Ilse Bray renounces for herself the right of return to Cardron Hold, and her place upon its roll of the dead, and her burial in its ground, and this freely, and asks nothing. Lida Min said quietly, "That is her hand. It is the hand in the buyer book. I have compared them. Alpha King, that woman scraped out her sister's name with a knife and wrote in her own, and then she signed away her road home so that Hollies could never call her back and never use her again. She was not sent." The lamp ticked. "She asked," said Lida. I stood up, I sat down again. 11 months. I had watched her come up out of the drain cut with her arms black. I had watched her comb the peat out of a boy's hair with her fingers because a comb tears it. I had thought, God forgive me. I had thought myself generous. I had thought, here is a woman who was thrown away, and I did not throw her. I had built an entire year on that sentence, and it was false in every word, and the woman it was false about had let me believe it, had let me stand there being kind at her for 11 months, and had never once corrected me. Why would she not tell me? I said. Lida Min looked at the parchment for a while. Perhaps, she said, because you never asked her a question you actually wanted the answer to. Then she took her lamp and went out, and left the writ and left me. The fog broke on the 11th night. Not lifted, broke, the way it does once in a generation when a wind gets under it out of the north. A hard, dry, savage clarity, stars like nails. The drown frozen from bank to bank for the first time in 20 years, and the long stone standing up out of it black and shining. At first light the watch on the gate blew the horn twice, which means one rider. It was not a rider. It was a girl on foot who had walked across 1.25 miles of new ice in the dark, alone, in a good cloak, and who fell down in my gate yard exactly where her sister had stood. Nola Bray was 20 now. She had her sister's gray eyes and none of her sister's stillness, and when we got her inside and got the ice out of her hair, she would not sit, and she would not drink, and she caught the front of my coat in both hands as if she meant to climb it. Where is she? She said. The year's up. It's up today. He's coming with 40 men to fetch her home, and I ran ahead. I ran, you have to. Fetch her home, I said. He'll take her back, Nola said. And he'll say you used her ill, and he'll show the hold her hands, Alpha King, her hands. Look at what she does all day. And he'll say the Alpha King of Velomore set his wife to handling corpses for a year like a beast. And it'll be a war by spring. It'll be a war by spring. Behind me in the doorway, very quietly, Ilsa said, Nola. Her sister turned around and burst into tears. They are the two least alike women I have ever seen. Nola went across that floor and took hold of her and cried into her shoulder, and Ilsa stood with her arms round her and her chin up and her face perfectly still and looked at nothing and said, You should not have crossed the ice. And then, after a moment, in a completely different voice, small, You should not have crossed the ice, and put her hand on the back of her sister's head. Nola pulled away and scrubbed her face with her sleeve. He doesn't know, she said. Alpha King, he doesn't know what she did. He thinks he chose her. She was shaking. It was the night before. He'd have sent me. I was to go. I was 19 and I was going to go, and I would have died of it. I'd have been dead inside the year. Everybody knew, and she came into my room and she said, Don't, she said. Nola, said Ilsa, enough. She went down to the muniment room in the middle of the night, said Nola, and she scraped my name out of the treaty with her own knife, and she wrote hers in, and in the morning she stood in front of Uncle Tam with the writ in her hand, and she said, Nola. She said, send me instead. The hall was full. It fills up in a hold when a horn goes at first light. Fen Hollow was there, and Ott and Bresk, and every man and woman of Wenlow, and my writ keeper at her table with her pen already down. And he laughed at her, said Nola. He laughed. He said the Alpha King will send you back before the ink's dry, and she said, and here the girl's voice went very steady, the way voices do when they have been carrying a thing a long way and are nearly home, she said, then he will have to do it in front of his own hold and look at me while he does it, and I will let him. And Uncle Tam stopped laughing, and he let her go, because he thought it would work. Nobody in that hall moved. Ilsa Bray stood in the middle of it with her sister's tears drying on her shoulder, and her hands, which are not beautiful, hanging at her sides, and she looked at me across 30 feet of my own floor with an expression I had never seen on her and have never entirely stopped seeing. She was ashamed. She thought I would be angry. She thought, this is what she told me long afterwards in the dark in the plainest words she owns, that I would think she had cheated her way in, and I would say so, and it would be written down, and it would be true forever. Writ Keeper, I said. Alpha King, Lita's pen was already moving. Do not write this. Her pen stopped. In 40 years I had never said it. There is no clause for it. There is no clause for anything that mattered that morning. Alpha King, she said, there is no. I know, I said. Don't write it, not one word of it. Whatever she said in Cardron, she said in Cardron, and Cardron's law can have it, and I will not have it entered here as a thing she owes. I heard my own voice go, and did not stop. She is not a debt. She has never been a debt. I have been reading her as a debt for a year because it is the only way I was ever taught to read a person, and I would rather burn this hall than have it written down that Ilse Bray came to me as an item in a schedule. Bresk at the wall made a small sound like a man set down after carrying something. I went and got the writ. Both copies of the Peace of the Drown are the same size, the same skin, the same hand. Ours lives in a chest with 3 locks, and I have the keys to all 3, because I do not trust my own hold with the thing that keeps us alive. I brought it out into the hall, and I laid it on the long table, and I put my hand flat on it, and every soul in Wenlow understood what I was standing next to, and the room stopped breathing. Because it was not only clause 6 on that skin, it was the cattle, it was the eastern peat, it was my dead men in Cardron's ground, promised home and linen, named. It was 11 years of everything we had spent, held down under one seal. Clause 6, I said, gives her to me. I looked at her. Ilse, everything I have said to you in this house, I have said to a woman who could not leave it, every kindness, I stopped, started again. You have been in my hall for a year and a day, and I have been generous at you, and you had no way to be anywhere else, and I have gone on doing it, and I have gone on liking myself for it. And a year ago I stood at that gate, and I thought I was saving a woman who had been thrown away, and I was not. Nobody threw you. You came. My hand was flat on the parchment. You came up my causeway in your working clothes to be refused in front of 1,000 people, so that a boy of 15 who went out to look at soldiers would be the last one. Nobody spoke. Somewhere out in the fog, the ice on the drown made the noise ice makes, a long groan like the moor turning over. I cannot ask you anything, I said, while that word is on that skin. And I picked up the Peace of the Drown, and I tore it in half. I will tell you what it sounds like. It sounds like a small, dry cough. It is nothing. 11 years of war and 40 men's lives and the whole architecture of a country, and it makes a noise like a man clearing his throat, and then there are 2 pieces of skin in your hands, and the seals are on the wrong halves, and it is done and cannot be undone, which is the entire principle upon which my ancestors built everything I am. Lita Min put both hands over her mouth. The peace holds, I said loudly to my hall, because we keep it, not because it is written. If it needs the skin, it was never a peace. It was a debt. I put the halves down on the table. The clause is void. There is no bride. There is no given. There is a free woman standing on the floor of Wenlow Hall who may walk out of that door and across that ice this morning and take her sister with her, and no man in this kingdom will follow her, and every road in Velomore is open to her while I am alive. I came down off the dais. I have thought since that I should have said it from up there in the proper place with the proper words. There are no proper words. That is the thing I had to learn, and it took me 11 months and a torn treaty and my whole idea of myself. I stopped in front of her. Ilse, I said, I want you to stay. There is a silence that a hall makes when the law breaks. It is not like other silences. Behind me, I heard Lita Min's chair go back and her pen come up off the table, and I did not turn around. Because want is not a word we say in Wenlow Hall. It has no quantity. It has no date. There is no hand it can be delivered into and no penalty if it fails, and it cannot be enforced by any power I have, and there is nothing on this earth that can make it true except the person it is said to. And behind me my writ keeper, 70 years old, who loves nothing in the world but accuracy, wrote it down. She told me afterwards that her hand shook so badly she had to do it twice. It is still there. It is the 8th line on the 9th skin of the year, in a hall where everything written is true and stays true, and it says, in a cramped clerk's hand, "The Alpha King said, I want you to stay." Ilse Bray looked at me, and she did not answer. She turned her head, and she looked at the two halves of the treaty lying on my table, and at her sister, and at the hall, and at the door standing open on a 1.25 miles of black ice. And I watched her count it, all of it, the cattle, the peat, the 40 men riding out of Cardron that morning to fetch her. And I understood that I had just handed the whole of my kingdom to a woman who had, 1 year ago, correctly calculated the cost of everything, and paid it out of her own pocket without telling anybody. "Alpha King," she said, "you have torn the peace." "Yes." "40 men are coming across that causeway." "Yes." "And you have nothing to hold them with, no writ, no clause, no hostage." Her chin came up. "You have made yourself a beggar in front of your own hold, for me. Do you know what that is worth out there?" "Nothing," I said. "It is worth nothing at all. That is why I did it." And Ilse Bray, who had washed the enemy's dead, who had come across the ice in an apron to be refused, who had never in her life been given a thing she did not first pay for, put her hands over her face. I have seen soldiers break. I have seen my own father break. It is not like that. She stood in the middle of my hall with her hands over her face and her shoulders absolutely still, and she made no sound whatsoever, and it went on for a long time, and nobody in Velomore moved a muscle. Then she took her hands down, and her face was wet, and she said, in her ordinary voice, the one she used to ask for lye and linen, "Then I will stay, and you had better let me speak to them, because you are very bad at it." Tam Hollies came onto the long stone with 40 men at the 3rd hour, and he found the gates of Wenlow standing open, and Velomore unarmed on the causeway bank, and his brother's elder daughter walking out to meet him alone over the ice. I have been asked many times what she said to him. I do not know all of it. I stood where she told me to stand, at 50 paces, with my hands empty, and Bresk beside me swearing steadily under his breath. I know she gave him the Buyer book. I know he opened it, standing on the ice with his 40 men behind him, and turned it toward the light, because there was a great deal of it that morning, off the frozen drown, and it hurt the eyes. And I know what is in that book. 11 years of names in one hand in one column, and Cardron's dead written in the margin where there is no law at all. Ren Ardley, 15. Ossian Kello. Vern Sad, a healed break in the left forearm. Tola Bray, her own mother, who had died in the second winter, and whom Cardron had buried, and whose name Ilse had copied into a Velomore book anyway, so that she would be in the same list as the boy who went out to look at soldiers. Holly stood on the ice with the book open for a long time, long enough that the men behind him began to shift. Then he lifted his head, and he called out to me across 50 paces, in a voice I had heard shouting at me for 11 years across worse ground. "Alpha King, there is no writ." "There is no writ," I agreed. "You tore it." "I did." "Then what," said Tam Hollies, "in the name of God is holding this?" And Ilse Bray said, quite clearly so that both holds heard her, "We are, uncle. We have been holding it since the thaw, every one of us who carried an end of a board." She closed the book and gave it back into his hands. "There are 11 of yours in the Buyer with their names on them. Bring the carts." He brought the carts. It took 9 days. It is the only 9 days in the history of the Drown when both holds were on the long stone at once with no weapons, and it was not a ceremony, and there was no music. Men from Cardron carried Velomore's dead up the bank, and Velomore's men carried Cardron's down, because Ilse said the carrying had to cross, or it would not mean anything, and nobody argued with her, because by then nobody in either hold argued with her about the dead. On the 6th day I saw Tam Hollies, Alpha of Cardron, on his knees in my Buyer with a piece of linen in his hands, being shown by Fen Hollow, who is Velomore to the bone and whose hands shake, how she folds the corner so it lies flat. He never apologized to me. I would not have known what to do with it. He is dead now some years, and the road across the eastern flats is his. He laid the first stone of it himself badly, and the stone is still crooked, and we have never straightened it. We were married in the spring on the causeway at the halfway stone, which belongs to nobody. There was no cloak. There was no crowning. There was no mark on her hand and no beast in me that rose up and spoke, and the wolves of the moor, who had wintered on the high ground as they do, came down that week and went past both holds along the far bank without stopping, on their own business, having no opinion. There was a lot of mud. Nola cried, Bresk who cannot sing sang. And there was one clause, written by Leda Min on a single skin, and it is the shortest thing in the archive of Velomore. It does not use the word given. It does not use the word held. I have read it perhaps 4,000 times, and I still do not entirely understand how a woman of 70 who loved nothing but accuracy came to write it. Item, they stayed. That is all. That is the whole law of my marriage. Every year on the day the ice went, both holds come to the halfway stone, and by the oldest custom in Velomore the Alpha King stands up and reads the piece aloud, so that no one may say afterward they did not hear it. It is my privilege. It is a good custom. I have prepared for it some years for weeks. And every year, as I stand and open my mouth to begin, my wife puts her hand over it. She does not do it unkindly. She does it the way she does everything, without any hurry, and she keeps it there. And both holds laugh, Cardron first. They always laugh first. And I stand on that stone in front of two peoples with the whole of my formidable law behind me, unable to say a single word. Nobody has ever asked me to finish.